Hello, everybody. Can you hear me clearly? This is going to be an interactive session throughout. I feel like impromptu works best when everybody's thinking and everybody's using their creative brains. I am so excited to be in front of you today. I cannot even contain it. Don't think too hard about these things over here, but eventually they will make an appearance. So, I am Iain Lampert from VIPHS, and I like impromptu. If you're watching this, you also like impromptu. Let me explain why, with an attention-getting device. This is me when I was younger. At that time, I could not pronounce the R sound clearly. I was shy as a kid because my last name is Lampert, so I said, I'm Iain Lampert. It's a pleasure to meet you. My speech therapist said, Iain, if you can say chocolate peanut butter, then you can have the chocolate peanut butter. And eventually it went from butter to butter, and I was able to get a scoop of that delicious treat. But before I was able to earn the chocolate peanut butter, I read a lot, but I was shy to share the stories that I read. I knew so many useless facts about fairy tales, about dinosaurs, about obscure anime and manga and comic books, and even though I had some friends, I didn't want to talk too often because I was shy. Once I was able to overcome that, I thought, is there any speech event where I could share story after story from my childhood, change it every single round, and in that way make new connections? And I thought maybe oratory, that's a way. You can write out exactly what you want to say. Extemp, you can speak spontaneously, but only in impromptu speaking was I able to share so many backlog stories from my childhood with captive audiences. I'm not going to share them with you right now, but that's why I fell so in love with the event, because there was so much to say and so many new things that I was learning all the time. I found out pretty quickly that a lot of impromptu speakers didn't approach it the same way. A lot of impromptu speakers approach it by giving the same story round after round. Canned speeches. We're aware of them. I think if you're familiar with impromptu, you're familiar with canning. And it took me a while to think of impromptu as an event that required any preparation at all. But I've come to realize that planning and canning are two separate things. And it's important to go into an impromptu round with a strategy and a game plan. A game plan that can shift at any moment, at any time, for any reason. So I'm going to share with you some things that I've learned about impromptu across the last decade. And you're going to share with me some of your own impromptu beliefs and outlines. Impromptu in 2018 and 2019 had a combined total of 1,046 entries at NSDA Nationals. That means it's the most well-attended event, except maybe extemp debate, but whatever. I'm not going to talk about extemp debate. It had more than both congresses combined, which seems to indicate that a lot of people are doing impromptu, but it seems to me that the same impromptu strategies tend to prevail year after year at the national level. That suggests that there's hundreds upon hundreds of impromptu entries that are going in without necessarily knowing what they're doing. And given that impromptu has now shifted from a consolatory event where it's one and done to a chance to try again, even if you do get a down and around for the coming national tournament with those new pilot rules, maybe we ought to reevaluate impromptu and put out more resources for competitors to have a better shot at it. So, I'm going to give you a roadmap. We're going to do an impromptu diagnostic together to see where you're at. We're going to talk about some impromptu structures and strategies. Then we're going to engage in some impromptu practice. Diagnostic. That's it. That's all there is on the slide. Here are three options for you. In the spirit of impromptu, I'm going to give you all 2 minutes. Please outline a speech on one of these prompts. If you feel confident at the end of those 2 minutes, please raise your hand and we'll come around with a microphone for you and you'll share that outline. If you want to share it in a speech voice, you're free to do that. 2 minutes starts now. Yeah. 30 seconds are used. One minute is used. Thirty seconds remain. Ten seconds remain. And that's time. Does any brave soul wish to share their outline? Sweet, can we please get the mic right over here? Thank you so much.
This is my event. Guys, comment. So, AGD. I don't need this. I'm a teacher voice. Oh my gosh. All right. So my AGD would be that I have never lived in the same place for more than 6 years in my entire life. And you would think I was a military family, 7 years. You think I was a military child? No, my dad was a teacher. And I was the oldest of 9 kids. Change, constant, all the time, daily. And so change is the only constant in our lives. So it's a daily thing. It's good for us, and it's preparation. There's my roadmap, right? All right, then in my daily application, teachers in classrooms. Debate teachers in classrooms. Every day is a new thing. A kid brings up a new question, a new current event, a new life story that happens, and we can really play on those changes and those things to grow and develop in our lives. An admin comes, tells us what? We need you to try a new strategy today. Oh, by the way, we're changing your schedule in a week, and you're going to have to make a new class plan for the rest of the year. Doing that right now. So daily change is a constant, and we grow from that change. Failures in life are what make us who we are. That we are learning from those things that we have in our daily lives, and we grow from those. We learn from those past mistakes. We move on to another one, and we can share that with our children and our students on how they can grow and learn from those failures and move on to life. And when we prepare, we can move on, because the best laid plans are the ones that help us to do it. Like, I've got my year planned for the whole next year, every weekend, every lesson planned for speech and drama and tournaments, and that'll all go up in the air at some point. But because I am prepared, I can change with that, I can move forward with that and be successful and make a great thing for my kids and for myself in life. There's my outline. Did I do it in 2 minutes?
Yay. So to recap, correct me if I'm wrong, the AGD is that you traveled a lot. The thesis was functionally, yes, this is true, change is the only constant in life. First point is daily, with the warrant of teacher. Second is that it's good for us in terms of overcoming failures. And third was sort of a solvency point about preparation. Preparation is good. Does anyone else have their own outline they'd like to share? Yes, right over there.
So Impromptu is this on? Okay. Impromptu is not my event. I'm an interp coach. But I chose number 2. Deep connection is the antidote to madness. I used as my AGD my grandmother, who slowly disappeared. The last 10 years of her life, nobody was home upstairs. So then I talk about connections of family and how those deep connections keep us going through good times, through hard times. Then my second point would be Alzheimer's, and how people hold on the very last second to those last people that they know and their deep connections. And my third point would be adopted families versus DNA families. Do we have those DNA connections, and can we create them?
And to reiterate, the AGD was about your mother. The first point was an extension of that AGD, is that right?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother. And then your second point was about Alzheimer's, and your third was about adoptive families and implications therein. Alrighty. Just by show of hands, who chose option 1? 2, 3, 4. Who chose option 2? 2, 3, 4, 5. Who chose option 3? The vast majority of people in this room. That's interesting. I'm going to move on from this to discuss impromptu must-haves, some of which were already uncovered during that brief exercise, hence a master class, not a beginner class. But I want to make sure we're all on the same page. I just want to explain these terms for the folks who are watching on this live stream or might watch this at a subsequent date. The introduction has the AGD, or attention-getting device. It's a story. While the ones you just heard were personal stories, the AGD does not at all have to be a personal story. It can be an impersonal anecdote. Then the link to the thesis, that is, explicitly show how the opening story connects to the point you're trying to make with the speech. The thesis, I think, generally needs to have a we need, we ought to, we must, we should statement. And that can just be an eloquent rephrasing of a quotation that you're given. But not explicitly introducing a thesis is a reason to be marked down in competitive impromptu rounds. So make sure you have the we need, we ought, we should, or perhaps we should not if you want to take the negative. The roadmap is what you heard. First, we'll talk about X, then Y, then Z. The detail of the roadmap depends on the structure that you choose, and we'll go over some of the structures that you might choose in competitive impromptu rounds. For each of your points, you'd have a transition, claim, warrant, and impact. If that sounds similar to debate, that's because it is. The difference is that that transition can take on a couple forms. For instance, you can transition from an historic example to an example about literature and just make that claim very explicitly. Now that we've talked about history, let's see how this is true in the world of literature. You can go from an example that is negative, for instance, someone who did not do a thing they should have done, to someone who did do the thing that you say is good, and that's a legitimate transition as well. But explicitly making a transition fulfills a subconscious or conscious checkbox for many judges. So a lot of good imprompters will forget to have a good transition. Within the claim, warrant, and impact, the warrant is basically what example have you chosen and does it prove the point that you're trying to make. But people often forget two things. They often forget to impact it or say why it matters. What unique lesson did we learn from that point? And also, they forget to link it to the original topic. People often link to the thesis they have chosen and then neglect their topic. For example, what thesis might you choose if you got the topic yogurt? Anyone want to take a spoonful of that? Take a bite of the topic of yogurt. Alrighty, right over there. Success is found in unlikely places if you got the topic yogurt. And I'm sure you can make a link. You can make a link about the creator of Chobani and how he's able to create such amazing things, and that's an unlikely immigrant story that was actually an example used in 2017 national finals by the runner-up. However, that a lot of impromptuers would then only link to the word success, unlikely, or place, and forget to link to the word yogurt as they went throughout their points. But that's often the joy of impromptu, is drawing that imagery, especially when you've got a concrete noun. The imagery of the quotation, the imagery of the concrete noun or the abstract noun or whatever the topic is. So, on the outro, make sure to recap the topic and thesis. Today we've discussed X topic, and we've seen that Y thing, which is the thesis, is true of the topic. We understood this through first point, second point, and third point, which is the repetition of the roadmap. In the call to action section, if you're good enough on word economy, then the call to action could be as long as 30 seconds, which is a while for especially novice or intermediate impromptuers to fill time. So I suggest breaking the call to action down across a couple levels. I think the first level is personal, that is only in my own life and my very direct connections with others. Then maybe on an educational level, then perhaps on a national level. All of those are options to say we need to make a change, but the change does not need to be explained in its own 1 minute point. The change can be explained in just a couple seconds and we can all be on the same page as that. And a lot of impromptuers forget that call to action as well. And they also forget to tie it back to the attention-getting device. Or if they tie it back, it's done in sort of a clunky way. There was a student who I helped coach back in 2014, 2015, and he ended every speech with, "and walk towards a better tomorrow." It worked. No matter what the topic was, it'd be, and walk towards a better tomorrow. He just made sure he had one good closing line. So I do suggest if students are having difficulty finishing their speeches, I think it's okay to can 5 to 10 closing lines that are generally applicable. Anything not make sense about this slide? Yes?
It makes sense. Would you include the reiteration of the quote tied into the thesis? Like, where do you install, like, me saying the quote out loud in my speech?
Oh, I put that with the thesis.
Okay.
So the initial statement of the topic, that is. I think the topic and thesis go together.
Okay, so you're saying topic, quote, whatever.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
How would you explain a warrant to kids in like 1 or 2 sentences?
Sure. What is the example that you're choosing to prove your point? And can that example be explained to someone who has no prior knowledge of the example? One common mistake I see impromptuers make is they choose a well-known example such as Harry Potter or the Hunger Games, and then they explain it as if I'm already familiar with Harry Potter or the Hunger Games. Now, I just so happen to be familiar with those books, but in case I was not, I would have no idea what they talk about when they use the Aloha Mora charm in order to get around Severus Snape and they're running through Hogwarts. I think that you have to help your students, especially when they're choosing works of fiction, limit the number of proper nouns that are used. Because I think the more names that are inserted into an impromptu speech, the more confusing it is. I think the same is true if anybody here is a mock trial coach or their school has a mock trial team. The more people introduce names and just throw them at people who are unfamiliar with the initial materials, it gets very confusing. I think a lot of impromptuers make that mistake. Moving on. Impromptu structures and strategies. I think we're going to spend a fair amount of time on this. Impromptu structures and strategies. So before I get to the next slide, what structures are you already familiar with? That is, the way to structure the main body of the speech. Yeah?
I've always been familiar with 2, 2, 2. So, like, 2, like, main points of analysis and 2, like, tangible examples for, like, underneath each of those.
Gotcha. 2, 2, 2. Any other ones? Yeah.
For like things of 3, just a lot of simple logical structures like the good, the bad, and the ugly, small to big, things like that.
Gotcha. Small to big. So small, medium, big, good, bad, ugly.
Subtopical or problem solution.
Yes. Sorry, say it one more time.
Subtopical or problem solution.
Yeah, subtopical or problem solution. Alrighty. Let's talk about some of these up here. So what I did was I went through every impromptu speech from in the national final round from 2017 to 2019, and I broke down the most common structures that were used. I could have gone before that, and I can make references to that, but I think that this will help make the point about the most common structures used. So, unified analysis, 2 contentions, you might call it the 2, 2, 2. That was used once in 2018 and once in 2019, both from the same area of Florida, as a matter of fact. Theory, application, individual, institutional, those can both be used. So for instance, for unified analysis, let's use the topic of vulnerability. Vulnerability, okay? If you were to get that topic, can somebody give me a thesis on vulnerability, a we need to or we ought to statement? Yeah?
We ought to embrace our vulnerabilities.
Yes, absolutely. We ought to embrace our vulnerabilities. Now let's get 2 specific lessons that can be derived from the overall thesis that we ought to embrace our vulnerabilities. What are 2 specific lessons underneath that? You don't need to give me the example, just the lessons underneath that. Yeah?
By understanding our weak points, we can seek to overcome them and improve.
Okay, by understanding our weak points, we can overcome them and improve, and it makes us human. So let's take either one of those 2. By understanding our weak points, we can overcome and improve, and it makes us human. Choose one of those 2. Now let's try to get some kind of theory that helps justify on a psychological or sociological level why this is true, and then an example that proves that theory that can be explained very concisely. So what's a theory that suggests perhaps why we often fail to overcome our obstacles and vulnerabilities? Yes? Sure, so self-fulfilling prophecy. Now let's get an example of, real or fictional, somebody who fell victim to a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Captain Ahab.
Okay, Captain Ahab. Now we've got a full point, right? We've got a thesis, we've got a subpoint under that, the lesson, and then we've got both a theory and application. Then you just do it one other time for that other point, and that is that structured unified analysis. Now, I think the reason that you only see it twice across those 3 years is because unified analysis is difficult to practice for in certain impromptu structures, and by structures I mean time-based structures. For example, in California, it's 2 minutes to prep, 5 minutes to speak. That means you have to go very quickly in order to make sure that you're functionally getting in 4 distinct points. At the national level, you often have that bank of 7 minutes. In that case, you might do a 5.5-minute speech, or some students I've seen do a 6-minute speech with only 1 minute of prep. That makes it easier to get in those functionally 4 points. But it's not as common, and I think word economy needs to be better than it often is for high schoolers. Now go on to 3 lessons. 3 lessons was very common. We saw it in 1/3 of the final rounds in 2017 and 2018, and half of the final round in 2019. Those 3 lessons are often very simple. The 3 lessons are often just like the lessons that we heard under the 2x2x2 structure. We should embrace our vulnerability, for example. Then you just have one example that proves it. Let's use a different topic. The topic is justice. Somebody give me an overarching thesis for the word justice. Yeah. We have to make justice happen. Now, somebody give me a sub-lesson that concerns why we have to make justice happen. Yeah.
The civil rights movement.
So that's an example, I would say. What's the lesson that guides the civil rights movement? Action achieve justice. So we have to make justice happen, specifically action achieve justice, for instance, the civil rights movement. Then you just do that 3 times, and that is a lesson-based speech in impromptu. Third, argumentative structure. Cause-effect solution, problem-cause solution were the most common ones that I've seen. We coached cause-effect solution for the 2017-2018 champions. We were inspired by 2015 champion. 2015 had problem-cause solution. In this, it's often a psychological example of some kind functions as the cause. Somebody who failed to uphold the lesson of the prompt equals the effect. The effect is almost always negative. And then the solution is somebody who effectively listened to the warning from the prompt. So let's use a different topic. This topic is going to be theater. So for theater, what's the action-oriented thesis, the we need to statement concerning theater? Yeah.
We need to encourage theater participation in our schools.
Okay, we need to encourage theater participation in our schools. We need to be more expressive. What's a cause or underlying reason why perhaps we don't encourage this enough? Yeah, funding. You can make an argument about funding. Then what's the impact of this or the effect? What do we see as a result? Yeah. Less empathetic students. Is there a specific example, a newsworthy story of less empathy within middle or high school students or college students?
I think we've had like a dozen or so shootings recently.
That's true. There's violence and there's outrage and there's a lack of connection. There's tragic things that occur. What's a solution?
Theater is an expression and a way for them to explore different perspectives and understand other people and their culture.
So theater is a way to express and connect. Is there a specific instance of a theatrical show that really exemplifies that connection, or a theatrical space, or a production group, or anything like that? Glee? Glee, the show Glee. It could be that, absolutely. Any other ones? You had one? Hamilton, sure. Could be that too. Yeah.
Wasn't Rent like really big for LGBT like when it came out? Like,
Yes.
that was their first experience with like LGBT people. Right?
Rent was huge, and right now I know, for at least my students, Dear Evan Hansen is very big. Be More Chill was very big as well. And then 3 lenses. 3 lenses is a way to dress up the notion of really just having 3 examples and showing Judge they are from different genres. So it could be historical, cinematic, literary, theatrical, whatever it is. This is just showing, Judge, I am differentiating between the 3 examples that I have selected. 3 Lenses won in 2014. 3 Lenses was a very, very good speech of a gentleman from Illinois. There was a question or comment?
What percentage would you say did the argumentative structure?
So we see here that argumentative structure was 1 person in 2017, 2 in 2018, 1 in 2019. 3 lenses, 3 in 2017, then 1 in 2018, 1 in 2019. When you look back at old NSDA videos, 3 lenses is a bit more popular. In terms of champions, unified analysis, the last time that won was in, I think, 2009. So it is often not done as effectively at the high school level. I understand that it's the norm at the collegiate level, but it's rare that you see a high schooler as effective at it. 3 lessons does quite well at 1 in 2019, and may I say that the winner in 2019 was absolutely phenomenal, Gabe. I don't know if you saw the round, but her speech was terrific. She got a topic that was about an obscure hurricane that hit Dallas decades ago, and she gave an insanely topical presentation on that specific hurricane. And then she linked it to the larger lesson of climate trends and catastrophe. It was very, very good, and it used the three lesson structure very well. Anything not make sense here? Any questions or further comments on this slide? Yeah.
Question. Have you had the chance to look at how well other students do using different structures? So we can see the winners here, but has anybody gone in saying, I'm doing this way or that way, and what's their success rate?
So you're saying...
Individual.
So it's difficult to track what percentage of individuals enter a tournament using X or Y structure and how it comes out of that. All I can speak to is my anecdotal knowledge about NSDA finals and California finals. I think that would be interesting after an impromptu tournament with a large entry pool to then ask them, what structure did you use? And see how many students just say, well, I used 3 points, without giving additional thought to what those 3 points are. So here's where it often goes wrong for impromptuers. Boring examples. Too obvious, too well-known, dispassionate, uncaring delivery. And I often push students to work past the generalizations that are made at the first layer of example. So if a student says, my example is education or the educational system, I'll always say, what facet of it specifically can you point me to an incident? What is the specific narrative that you're trying to prove in this instance? If someone says, and I know, for instance, that no coach in here would say civil rights and then just vaguely describe civil rights. They give me specific stories, but a lot of students will. They'll say the civil rights movement and then speak in generalities about that movement. Or they'll talk about a president's tenure and just say the president was good and make overarching claims without saying what acts they passed or what strategies they engage with. So students have to be specific for it to be good. Also, their specifics should teach you something new. I'm okay if in the roadmap they tell me an example that I believe I know about already, for example, J.K. Rowling or Mark Zuckerberg or Martin Luther King Jr. I think I know where they're going once they start, but if they tell me something new about that individual, then I really enjoy that analysis. They subverted my expectations effectively. But I think that if your student is telling you something that you already know, then they're making a mistake in impromptu. Dispassionate delivery, by that I mean the student should seem like they enjoy or at least see the merit of what they're discussing. So many impromptuers that I've seen at the highest level kind of break the rule of not using personal examples in the main body, and they get away with it because they obviously care so much. The winner in 2016, one of the best speeches that I've seen at NSDA, his third example was about his grandfather who is watching now on the live stream and how much he loved his grandfather. And it linked very well to the topic, and he seemed sincere. The ethos was all there. And even though in a smaller room I wouldn't have recommended it, at that time, in that moment, it worked exceptionally well. Second, lack of links. Even at the highest level of nationals, impromptuers forget to repeat the topic every example. I think the topic should be repeated multiple times per example. I think that if an impromptuer gives a claim and then gives a long warrant and a little impact at the bottom, and they didn't explicitly say the topic multiple times in that example, they've made a mistake. I think the topic should occur ideally 3 times. First, when you're transitioning, there should be some reference to the topic or the imagery of it. In the main body of the warrant, you should link it. And then as you're going out of it with the impact, you should also restate that topic somehow. And you don't have to restate the entire quotation if it's a long quotation. Or this year in national finals, there were paragraph-long historic events and the context surrounding them. You shouldn't have to repeat the entire thing, but you should repeat enough so that the judge knows that you are making every effort to be topical and show that direct connection. You're answering the question. Anything that makes sense here before I move on? Cool. So a lot of people ask me, Ian, where do you get examples? Where do you find them? Where are these cool narratives in these stories? There were a lot of places, but I found some to be particularly useful. 3 categories: YouTube channels, wiki/lists, and subreddits. First, on YouTube channels, watchmojo.com is video top 10 lists. Not every video top 10 list is useful for impromptu, but a lot of them, especially those that summarize the greatest X or the greatest Y, are useful for impromptu. The Infographic Show is a really entertaining channel where cool, kind of very flat-looking animation is used to express little-known things about history. Overly Sarcastic Productions, also animation-based, tend to break down history for you and also break down literature with a lot of very good, timely jokes that make Generation Z people laugh. The School of Life. This is good for cause analysis if you're running argumentative structures. We had an XPOS do very well at Nationals in 2018, and the topic was wabi-sabi. That was largely inspired, the Japanese pursuit of the imperfect, by a School of Life analysis that I initially thought would be good for an impromptu cause. So School of Life is very good for speech ideas across the board, but I think in particular I like it for impromptu. Productivity Game is one of the most undersubscribed channels that gives such good analysis for nearly every speech and debate event, but I love it for impromptu. Productivity Game breaks down all of those books that you see at the airport about how to improve your life and your business, and it does it in 10 minutes with a cool infographic style, and they also give you a page PDF of the key takeaways from that book. It is such a good channel. It is completely free. I think that everybody should subscribe to Productivity Game. They did not endorse me, but I think that it is a very, very good channel for impromptu. And Great Big Story is just that, except the stories aren't really that long. They're about the person who you didn't know did blank thing, who invented Cheez-Its, and what was their process. So things that I think are useful for impromptu. The reason I'm limiting it right now to those channels, even though there are so many more channels, is I find that the more options I throw at students, the more decision paralysis sets in. There's this old Calvin and Hobbes comic strip where Calvin's dad goes into a supermarket and he talks about how he can't decide between the various different sorts of peanut butter there. Do I get crunchy or is extra crunchy or is it extra, extra crunchy? So I think you should limit it to a little better pool. Wiki/lists. Who's ever been on TV Tropes? My friends, you must go to TV Tropes. It is the best wiki on the internet. Let me sell you on TV Tropes. TV Tropes is like this. You said Moby Dick. You go to Moby Dick on TV Tropes, and then you see there's a list of every literary and cinematic cliche in Moby Dick. Then you click on the cliche, and it takes you to every work that also has that cliche. So if you want to find connections between literature and film, for instance, my favorite cinematic trope is the Groundhog Day loop, where you're stuck in it and you have to break it. I love that. So on TV Tropes, I went to Groundhog Day. I found there's a trope called Groundhog Day loop, and I found all the movies that share that common feature, and then I had great viewing times. So I recommend TV Tropes for your own betterment, but also for students. Their useful notes page is actually not so much about television tropes. That's more about things to do with psychology and mythology and history and sociology and all of these things that I think are really useful on Wikipedia now. Wikipedia is a vast ocean of information, but there's a couple lists that I think are useful for impromptu. One is the list of cognitive biases. If you want to find causal analysis, why we often fail to make optimal decisions, cognitive biases are where it's at, and this list breaks it down in a very simple and clear way. Then, the list of corporate collapses and scandals, there's a lot there. I mean, there's so many corporate collapses and scandals, and almost all of them can be directly linked to a cognitive bias. So, if you have a student who's intent on running an argumentative structure of cause-effect solution, your cause and your effect for many topics can be found on those 2 lists alone. But what about your solution? Maybe it comes from list of things considered the best ever. Transcendent exemplars, some of which we already know about, but let's say you find that, Titanic actually I think it's Titanic. No, it's Gone with the Wind, that's the one. Gone with the Wind adjusted for inflation has sold, I think, more money. It's got a lot of money for movies. So maybe you find something about its creation that is not obvious to the layperson. Maybe that's a full outline for a speech. Is a cause from cognitive biases, is an effect from a collapse or a scandal, and then it's an exemplar from the best ever who is able to overcome our natural cognitive biases. And then on subreddits, I do not endorse all of Reddit, but I endorse a couple subreddits. This is a forum where users get to upvote content that they like. One is our Wikipedia, because if there's a really interesting Wikipedia article, then you'll see it at the top of there. The next is our Today I Learned, where people upvote interesting things that they did not know about prior. Good impromptu examples. Next is our Not the Onion. Anybody been on this before? Not the Onion? I see some nods. Not the Onion, if you don't know, is basically things that seem ridiculous enough to have been posted in the Onion, but they're real things that happened. I also think Not the Onion is fantastic for extemp intros, too. And then our Uplifting News. When you want positivity in your life, when you're looking for a solution or a positive lesson and takeaway, Uplifting News is far more pleasant than our news, which is really sad. That said, some of these narratives are super long. Remember, they need to functionally be explained in a warrant in about 30 seconds. So just because there's a really great story there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's great for impromptu. It can be broken down more simply. Alrighty, now I'm going to have some interactive moments. Lincoln lessons. Activity 1 is find an example, then receive a prompt. 30 seconds to prepare a 1-minute point where you connect the example to the prompt, making it seem like the middle of a speech. This is a good way to test if an example that a student has found is actually useful across more than the niche that it was originally connected to. I'd like somebody to try this. Who would like to try this? Sweet, okay, great. So if we can get you the mic, I want you to choose a specific narrative and just tell us what that narrative is. A narrative example.
A narrative example.
Yes.
That's a narrative example. Oh. Being bullied in school.
Okay, so a time in which you or others were
Yes.
bullied in school.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now I'd like somebody to give a prompt that does not obviously connect to being bullied in school.
Could we just do like that one word?
Yeah.
Like light switch?
Light switch. Okay, sure. So you have to stick with the example of being bullied in school, but you have to connect it to the word light switch. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to think, and then the full minute point right now. 30 seconds starts now. 30 seconds remaining. And time. 1 minute, please.
All right, so as a student in schools, we see bullying all the time. And there was a specific moment where I saw a student who, out on the field, had come back into me and said, I was just pushed down out on the field by some friends, and they gave me dog food to eat and made barking noises at me and things like this. And they were trying and struggling so much because they thought they were being accepted and they thought they were going into something. And I had to talk to them about, it's not about you, it's about them. And a light switch went on with that student about how it's got to change from me looking at them as a bad guy, but how are they hurting, and maybe I can do something to help them and not let it become a personal moment. And that light switch came as a thing for not only them, but as they started to reach other people, to become light switches on our team and within our community about how we treat other people.
Someone else want to try? One more go with that. That's okay, we're going to do another one. So this second one, you receive a very specific and narrow prompt. And then you're just going to take a little bit to think of an obvious example of that prompt and explain it obviously. And then for the second try, I'm going to press you to find a very not obvious example after giving you a research opportunity. So this way the student gets the ability to express the thing that is very apparent and bubbling on the surface, but then you force them to go a little bit deeper with that level of analysis. So let's do that real fast. Anyone want to try this one? All right, sweet. Thank you so much. So let's go with a very specific and narrow prompt. It's going to be Mitch McConnell falls and fractures himself. That's a very, very narrow, specific prompt. So 30 seconds to think of an obvious 1-minute narrative you can draw from that. Five seconds. And that is time. Go for it.
When we think about the idea of Mitch McConnell falling and fracturing his shoulder, we come to the concept of karma and the idea that sometimes things happen and we can almost wish and predict that that might occur. We can look at this through the use of Harry Potter and the character of Sybil Trelawney, who is a seer who sometimes can see the future and almost predict that death and destruction are going to happen when she sees that Harry has the Grim in front of him, and that predicts his death. Later on, she has a real prediction about it, but similarly, we can see that those who wished ill upon Senator McConnell now can look at it and say, well, he kind of got what he deserved because after blocking so many bills in the Senate, now he winds up fracturing his shoulder and has a lot of pain.
So now the step 2 is you have up to 2 minutes because for the sake of time here, let's just give you 1 minute. Now research this in a bit more depth. And after researching in a little more depth, a specific prompt, then you come back with another 1 minute piece of analysis. So time starts now on that. And as the gentleman is researching, are there any questions about either of these exercises? Cool.
Yes. The specific narrow prompt that you gave in this activity wasn't really like, it wasn't a quotation or it was just like something that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, would you recommend using like an impromptu quotation or like something that students would see in a round?
Yeah, well, that is something that they might see in a round, especially at NSDA Nationals.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, topic areas are increasingly getting very hyper-specific to the extent that this national final, as I referenced before, but I'll make very explicit, like they were paragraph-long specific narratives that occurred in Dallas decades ago. So the ability to adapt to very specific prompts, I think, is important to do. Okay, that is 1 minute. Take 2.
Senator McConnell has had a very, very bad week. The week started off with cries about Moscow Mitch, where the Kentucky Democratic Party has been raising incredible amounts of funding by selling T-shirts and hats, decrying him as Moscow Mitch for his refusal to even allow election security bills to come up on the floor of the Senate for a vote. Similarly, yesterday he put out statements expressing sympathies for the shootings that occurred in El Paso and Dayton, but simultaneously saying that any bills that the House might have passed that would provide for background checks or other gun control would not be brought up on the floor of the Senate. So when word leaked out that he had fallen and fractured his shoulder, the idea of karma came up in the media as just a thought that perhaps Senator McConnell has received some just desserts.
And I note that the difference is the second set of analyses were very topical, very on point, and I think that exploring it through both lenses, which is the metaphorical connection one and the hyper-topical one, helps the student understand the process of quick research and comprehension and connection. I think it's an important activity to do. Now we are on the last little segment. We're about 17 minutes remaining, and I think that is good, because that is the time I have allocated. Impromptu practice. Common topic areas, I think, can be divided into 2 separate categories, and it sort of speaks to what you just mentioned. And that is, some are easily prepped out. Quotations and nouns, abstract and concrete, are easily prepared for in any competition. But people, places, and current/historical events require real spontaneity. And a good impromptu coach prepares their students for both sets. As a matter of fact, I regret not sufficiently preparing my students for the second set going into Nats. I think that they got lucky in earlier rounds because they got topics related to Lee Harvey Oswald and the JFK assassination, and we had coincidentally happened to watch the Jerry Spence/Vince Bugliosi mock trial, where the two amazing litigants are going back and forth concerning Lee Harvey Oswald. So they lucked into that, but that wasn't me as a coach. I think I should have generally prepared them better. So here's how to practice out the easily prepped ones. 90% of nouns/quotations directly link to these three topic areas: determination, change, and connection/love. And if all of your impromptuers are prepared to deal with those three topic areas going into any competition, they are very likely to feel confident about a good number of their rounds. Now, there's obvious determination examples. There's obvious love examples. Somebody give me a really obvious love example. Yes, that is the one. Everyone knows Romeo and Juliet. Ban it. Ban it unless they're saying something new about Romeo and Juliet. What's an obvious determination example?
Steve Jobs.
Yeah, Steve Jobs. Sort of the really well-known tech giant folks. Ban it unless they can tell me something new about Steve Jobs. On the change, something about a societal change or individual change. What's an obvious example? Yeah, Barack Obama. Hope and change. Ban it unless they can say something new. So outline one of these three prompts. It asks for you to do that right now. Functionally, you're rewriting your initial quotation outline from before. This time I would ask you, if you didn't before, use one of the argumentative structures or lesson-based or lens-based structures or the 2x2 structure that we talked about beforehand. And try to go out of your way not to have any obvious analysis, try to make the links clear. So I'm asking you to re-outline one of those three prompts. And if you'll think back, those three prompts, the first was determination, and then there was connection to love, and then there was change. So that is the link. Please do that right now. Just take 2 minutes and re-outline the speech that you did before. One minute used. Thirty seconds left. And time. Someone wish to share the new outline that they've done? Yeah, perfect.
So I had similar points to the other one that was given on the change is the only constant in life. My first point, or do you want what the new one is? Is that what you mean?
One more time, sorry.
Do you want what the new one is? Is it not?
I can't hear you. Just talk up just a little. I'm sorry.
Do you want what the new one is?
Yeah, what the new one is.
Okay. Changing clothes like cities and friends, because I moved a lot growing up, not 7 times, but like 8 times, which then transitions into The Lion King and how you really have this whole idea teaching children very early on about change in life, and you have to deal with it and move past it. And how we still have to deal with change because they're remaking all of these classic things we have from our childhood, continuing to change the narrative of what we know. And then teaching students not just how to change, but that it will never stop. And that we as teachers need to continuously take that to heart, and we as coaches as well, because the system's always changing, and if we refuse to change, we're doing a disservice to our students.
Nice. Thank you so much, sir. I appreciate that sharing. Alrighty, I'm going to move on to the next. How to practice for more demanding and spontaneous prompts. So delivering fully topical intros, roadmap included, for concrete nouns, people and things, and historic/current events, I think is very important. I hate concrete noun speeches where a competitor will get one object, but in their AGD discuss a different object. For instance, a competitor might get the prompt sword, and they might have something about the pen is mightier than the sword and how we shouldn't be so quick to physical violence. But in the introduction, they talk about a time where they were punching a punching bag, and that's their link to violence. So I kind of get how they got there, right? But if the topic is sword, I would love to hear something about a sword in the introduction. I don't want the judge to be confused. It's like one instance where a student got a quotation from Dumbledore, and they opened with a different quotation from Dumbledore. It's unnecessary. You don't need it. Make it simple. Make it clear. For people and things, the AGD they practice should be specifically about the person or the thing. So if they get the prompt about Lee Harvey Oswald, they should tell me about Lee Harvey Oswald in the introduction. If they get a historic or current event, for example, the launch of the Boeing 747, they should talk about the launch of the Boeing 747 in the introduction. And experimenting with a different lesson and argumentative structure is important. What you might do for a particularly good student who might understand structure well but fall back on the same all the time. For example, I had a student who always did cause-effect solution, and they found a very general cause, and they used that for nearly every prompt. I said, this is getting boring. I want you to find a new structure. And they came back to me with, okay, we're going to do individual, institutional, and international. And I thought, that's cool. That's a new thing. And maybe functionally it'll end up being very similar to cause-effect solution, but at least you're trying to draw new connections and new ways of structuring that speech, and I appreciate that. So forcing those paradigm shifts, I think, is important. Anything not make sense on this one? Yes?
What do you say to them about when the topics are so specific, where they pick three, and it's like, oh no, I don't know any of these people. I don't know any of these historical events.
Right. So the question is, if anyone didn't hear it, what happens when the topic is so specific they don't know about it at all, really? Then what I suggest that they do is they try their best to still do a topical attention-getting device. They might know enough to squeak out 15 to 30 seconds of topical analysis. And then they can pivot to the larger lesson and make it very clear that they're pivoting towards that larger lesson. But nonetheless, they should try to make it seem non-canned. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say the topic is about a space rocket flight that they know nothing about at all. But they're aware of things that happen in space. They can still make a larger point about innovation and humanity exploring the final frontier, and then they can give me some Star Trek analysis that is still an attempt to be kind of topical, and as a judge, I would be okay with that. That's what I would say. All right. Catching canning, change the prompts, change the world. Here are good ways as you run your local tournaments or you help your students practice to make sure that they don't fall back on the same planned examples every time. We're in our last 5 slides too. It's been a journey together, and I appreciate it. 1, table topics. Table topics are from Toastmasters. Table topics are open-ended questions. There are many open-ended questions that force them to speak of their personal experience or of their family's experience or of their likes and dislikes in a way that cannot fall easily into a 3-canned example speech. So using a table topic about, if you, go back to the Groundhog Day example, if you could relive the same day again and again and again, how would you approach it? Sure, you might have Groundhog Day in there in the speech. That'd probably be my introduction. But then I would probably talk about specific things that I would do and why. That would force me to think more diligently and creatively than if I just got another quote that was basically about determination or change or connection. And memes. Memes are fun. We ran them in the final round of La Costa Canyon in San Diego a few years back. I thought they were real good. Showing a student a meme or an image of some kind is good to prompt more specific analysis, because the best competitor in that round will not just take the image, say, of forest, let's say get a picture of a forest, and talk generally about nature. If they can, they'll talk about specific things in the image, the way the light hits this part. And I think if a student gets into that image in depth, I would love to see that as a judge. I think that'd be a really cool way to differentiate themselves. And if you have your students practice that way and then force them to go more specific, I think it really helps. For instance, when I'm practicing with my students, I will choose a random specific object in the room, describe it very diligently and in a detailed fashion, and then have them speak to that description. So it won't be the topic backpack. It'll be Jackson's backpack that's purple and also has the broken zipper. And if they don't use every part of that, then they're not saying the actual topic I gave them. I want to hear analysis about the backpack. I want to hear that it's purple. I want to hear about the broken zipper. I want to know what all of that means. Just a few more slides. Self-spar. We did self-spar last year. We don't have enough time to fully go through it, but I'll just explain it to you real fast. Actually, we'll do like a very brief demo. So self-spar is when you give them a 1.5 minute prep time. They prepare both the affirmative and negative side of a simple topic. The topic might be cats are better than dogs. Then they have to argue on the affirmative for a minute, the negative for a minute. They self-cross-examine for 2 minutes, then give 30-second conclusions. What I want to do is just jump straight to somebody cross-examining themselves on a topic for 1 minute. Do I have any volunteers? It's going to be good. Trust. Please. Yes, thank you. I knew it would be you. That's so good. Okay, I'm going to give you that simple topic. Cats are better than dogs. Please stand and ask yourself questions, angling yourself slightly as you change perspectives. 1 minute. You can pop if you can pop, otherwise just angle yourself. Time starts now.
Would you say that cats or dogs are more loyal? It depends on the specific animal, the specific cat or dog. Some dogs are really temperamental, and some cats are really affectionate. Okay, what uses would you say that a cat has that a dog can't accomplish? Dogs have lots of jobs and uses in our society. Well, I would say that cats have lots of emotional support use, and they're really useful for families and children and lots of different kinds of roles that dogs can't fulfill. How much time do I have left? Am I doing this right? Okay. Let's see. What kinds of, do dogs have better like cognitive benefits or emotional benefits than cats have overall? No, I don't think so. I think they're pretty equal.
Thank you. Now that is filmed. One last slide. 3 drills to help with speaking and dynamism. So the first is on free association. Students often get into this pattern of needing to say the perfect thing, especially if they're transitioning from oratory or interp into impromptu. So the free association prompt is you get a prompt and you just immediately start saying stuff, and you say it quickly. It doesn't necessarily need to make sense, but it has to just keep coming out of your mouth. Can I have somebody try this for 30 seconds only? Yes, please. I'm going to give you a prompt. Don't think about it. Just start talking quickly and emphatically into that mic, okay? 3, 2, 1. Glasses.
Glasses are awesome, and they're associated with really smart people. You know, all the nerds always wear glasses. It's a fun story. One of my teachers, actually, she literally got her eyes, damaged her eyes just so she could get glasses because she was blonde and she hated being called blonde in school. So that's a fun story about glasses. Glasses are really
All right,
cool,
time.
obviously.
Thank you. Fun prompt. Fantasy Shark Tank. That's when you receive an object, you've got 10 seconds to think, and then sell me on its fictional function and fictional brand name and convince me to buy it. I need a volunteer. Someone's going to sell me on what this is, what it's called, and why I should buy it. Someone shall do this. Or my weak arms will have to support this until you do. And I'm very weak. Please. I suffer in front of you. And time is running out. Oh, sweet. Yay. Alrighty. Take a few seconds to think, and then sell me on what this is and why it matters. And go for it.
So this is the ethical child leash. As you can tell, they are fully in control. They're agreeing with consent to be on a leash by holding it. And you, as the parent and or teacher and or speech coach, are also consenting. So we're all ethically making sure we stay together at speech tournaments, airports, and the playground. You will be in control, but they will think they are.
Thank you. And the very last thing I have for you today is ripped from the headlines. It's when you receive a headline and you need to give me at least 3 examples of stories or trends that contextualize the headline after researching. So for instance, if you were to get the example of the Mitch McConnell one that was brought up before, you would then find 3 stories that show why this matters. Maybe one is about previous obstructionism that you alluded to. Maybe another is about elder care and health care. And maybe a third is about the idea of karma that you mentioned before. That can help contextualize it. We have about a few seconds left, and this is my last slide. So are there any questions whatsoever? Yes?
I'm sitting in the back, so I'm freezing. Iain, the kids that did well in impromptu, what's their main event?
Depends. Typically extemp, but sometimes oratory. I'd love to see like a poi person win impromptu, though. That'd be cool, too. Any other questions? Yes?
I coach middle school students, and the 2 main problems I see, or the challenges for impromptu are, 1, they don't end their speech, they just sort of run out of road. And then the other one is if they get into a space where they're saying that we should all do such and such, or you need to do something, then the whole speech ends up being in second person almost. And then I have 12-year-olds that are giving advice to the judges and not making it very specific. So
Yeah, two points. The first, which is about conclusions, do conclusion drills. Give them a minute of prep, then make them only do the 1-minute long conclusion, not the other 4 minutes of the speech, until they're good at giving that final minute. And then on the call to action point for middle schoolers, have them constrain their advice to things they've experienced, like being in school. And then judges might find it charming. Any other questions, or are we good? We're good. That's my information if you need me. Thank you so much.